Mr. Jacobson,
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Here.
Mr. Steen,
Here.
Mr. Gehrig, Mr. Redlinger,
Here.
Dr. Mahoney, Mr. Grinberg.
Here. Okay, thank you, Briel. We do have a quorum by my count. Item 2, I'll accept the motion approval of minutes.
Peterson, so moved.
McCall, second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. Item 3, Mr. Costin, can you walk us through approval of the bills?
Certainly can. On the bills list today, there's $6,211.21 is the total for the bills. 5.6 million of that is to the Cass Joint Water Resource District, and when you look at the detailed report on page 8, there's I believe about 6 larger land payments that compromise that being as large as it is. So there are some land transactions moving through the system. That's a good thing. Other ones are just the legal that we see every month and some incidental expenses. So other than that, I didn't have any comments.
Any questions for Kent or comments?
Steen moves to approve.
Or a second?
Chuck, second.
Discussion? Briel, I forget always if we do a roll call or can we do a voice on this?
Roll.
Normally we do a roll call for the bills.
Please take the roll then.
Okay, Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson, not able to hear you, Lori. Oh, okay. Ms. McCall,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Grinberg.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Anyone that's joined that wants to acknowledge to be in the minutes that has joined maybe a little late, please let Briel know you're on the line. If your name wasn't called, if you weren't here to hear your name, please acknowledge your presence. Okay, then we'll move to number 4. Kent, back to you, financial report.
Sure, I'll start on page 15, and the comprehensive total for 2020 spend year to date is $5,042,750, and the life to date project accountability for the total is $539,358,407 for the dollars. If you look at this report a little bit, I wanted to explain something that's happening presently because of our audit. We are starting to compile the financial statements on an accrual basis. So you will see the city of Fargo, if you go to the top of that report in the upper right-hand corner for 2020, the city of Fargo, the $1,648,000, and then the Cass County, $215. We're accruing revenues. There's a 2-month delay in the revenues that come as the payments are received from the time it hits the cash register till the time we ultimately get it. So because we're in the process of doing accrual-based financial statements, we're pulling those cash basis payments into 2019 as receivables from the entities. So that's why you're seeing not much revenue there. The revenue will continue to be collected in each and every subsequent month, and then we accrue 2 months at the end of the year as well. So there's some of that going on presently because our internal staff are working on preparing the financial statements. So if anybody thought we were a little lean on revenue, it's not because a huge decline, at least not yet. But anyway, I wanted to comment on that because it might look funny to some that there's less revenue than there is expense. So on to page 16, with regard to the net positions, we've got an increase in our net position. Again, it's 94 million. This is on page 16, 94,439,393, most of which is a straight up cash balance on that. Then I wanted to ask the committee to just ignore the financial statement on page 17. There are some data transfer errors and reconciliation issues that didn't get communicated correctly. So I would ask just for that to be stricken from the record, if you will. Other than that, I don't have any further questions unless there's comments or concerns.
So to your point, Kent, will this be updated and available tomorrow?
I'm not sure about that. I can put that on my list. Basically, because we're doing all these accrual entries, the data got the difference between the cash basis and the accrual basis got all lumped together. So the numbers are drifting on the revenue side. So I'll make a note of it. I'll see what I can do.
Okay, and at a minimum then, I would like you tomorrow to just talk about that. I know it's traditional, you're not part of the full DA, just the finance, but I would look to you to explain that tomorrow.
Sure, I can do that.
Questions for Kent? Hearing none, I accept the motion to recommend the financial report to the Diversion Authority Board tomorrow.
Dan makes that a motion.
Is there a second?
Montplaisir, second.
Thank you. Discussion, questions? Hearing none, Brio, please take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. McCall,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Grimberg.
Aye. Thank you. Number 5, Joel, Director Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee. Good to have you guys here remotely. I'll just start out by saying that the diversion has transitioned to entirely virtual. In some cases, I think we're getting more done per day than in the past, just because we can pack more meetings in right next to each other and nobody has any transportation time. So things are still moving along very well. I think we met our expectations for the last month, and I'll just go through some of the financial data and explain that to the committee and take any questions at the end here. So here you can see a level 1 summary. Of course, Kent has mentioned that the total to date of the 539 expenditures for the overall program costs. You can see our 2020 budget as far as how we're tracking as of 3/27 in relation. So as of today, we're on track for this year as far as majority of the budget items. So I'll dig into the level 2 summary here. So as you can see, a lion's share of our activity has been focused around the lands program, and I'll show you on the next page the P3. And so you can see we've spent 1.9 million to date for the lands program. And you can also see the 5 million for lands acquisition. That's for the actual property. And you can see the different items there as far as where those expenditures have taken place. I'll also note we've also the City of Fargo is undertaking a quite large in-town levy protection program this year, and as you can see, we're about 2 million into the 24 million that we had budgeted for 2020. And moving into the last page of the level 2 detail here, you can see engineering fee expenditures of about 617 to date for our budget of 3.1 million. And you can see how those have been distributed through the different projects that we have. Program support services, that's the PMC. We've expended 2.3 million to date of the 16.2 budgeted. That is on track and on budget. And then the very bottom, you can see our debt service payments and our maintenance payments for total expenditure year to date of $13.3 million. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for Joel? Okay, hearing none. We're moving to item 6 then.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of contracting actions for the Finance Committee to consider for recommendation to the Diversion Board. The first one is in your packet. It is a professional services agreement for crop insurance development, and that is with Watson Associates. And for the Finance Committee's consideration, Watson Associates has worked on the project in the past in conjunction with the idea of a crop insurance program for the diversion. And what this addresses is a summertime crop loss event in relation to the diversion project impacts in the upstream mitigation area. And so what Watson Associates will be preparing for us is an actual crop insurance rider that we will take to the market that will be available for producers in the upstream mitigation area if they so choose. The diversion authority would pay for the crop or the insurance premium if the producer were to elect, and this would protect the producers in the highly unlikely event that the diversion project operated during a summertime rainfall. And so what Watts will be preparing that rider for us and having that available for the upstream mitigation area producers. Mr. Chair, would you like to take these one at a time?
Yeah, let's do that. Discussion,
Okay.
questions on Watson Associates?
Mr. Chairman, this is Chad.
Yes.
Joel, this was brought up during last session. I'm not sure if you were at the meeting, but I had asked Eric Dodds or someone to figure out quantitatively what it would take for the diversion to operate, meaning, 6 inches of rain in a 2-hour period, quantify that so that when this comes up again, and it will, that we can say, I called it unicorn insurance, and John Shockley got mad at me, but I think what we need to do is have that number at the tip of our tongue, so when it comes up again this next session, we can say, well, yes, if it rains 6 inches an hour for 75 days in a row, yeah, but let's be honest, the entire Red River Valley is flooding, so everyone's out. So it'd be great if someone could give me even a rough guess. Would be an outstanding thing to have on the tip of my tongue. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Peterson, that is a good thought. Certainly something we can prepare and disseminate that information of what a rainfall event would be in relation to the upstream storage area. I'd like to note on that idea that this crop insurance development is going to be something that will be somewhat surgical because each property has different risks associated with it. Considering how close it is to the southern embankment. And so a summer rainfall event could impact some of the properties adjacent to the southern embankment. Say the borrow ditch along the southern embankment gets inundated during a rainfall event and you have some level of water on the adjacent properties. However, the chances of a summer rainfall event affecting a property on the southern extents of the upstream mitigation area is highly unlikely, and that would be the case where, as you mentioned, a 6-inch rain for 75 days straight, may, and I exaggerate, of course, may impact those properties. So that the risk changes as you look at the upstream mitigation area, depending on where you're focused. And that will be taken into account in the crop insurance development services from Watts.
Further questions?
This is Kent. I had a question on the billing detail. It said it was a lump sum billing contract for the first phase. I was just curious because that seems a little odd to me, but maybe I'm just thinking of it differently. I'm just questioning why we'd have a lump sum contract.
Well, thanks for that question. A very good question. It is not a, and maybe I'll refer to John Chockley if he's on the line. He did review the agreement very closely. The way I understand is that it's a lump sum maximum, but it's billed out at hourly rates. And so it's technically an hourly not to exceed type of a contract, which is similar to how we normally contract for professional services. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct, Joel. And just for the board's information, we had just a few cleanups in the agreement. We wanted to make sure we got a draft agreement in the packet. There'll be some minor cleanups that we worked through with Watson Associates, and one of them was just cleaning up that billing language. But just due to the time constraints and Watts was very busy, as were all insurance companies dealing with the COVID-19 issues. And so we were a little bit late getting all of this in the packet, but those are minor cleanups that'll be undertaken. So if the board is inclined to approve it, we would be asking for approval with in substantially the form presented with the cleanups deemed appropriate by the executive director.
So then you're going to change the text of the language in the contract to say phase 1 will be billed the same as phase 2. That's the cleanup you're referencing? Yeah,
there'll be some other minor cleanups. We had a minor cleanup regarding the intellectual property, and then the open records clause, and just some other non-substantive types of cleanups on the agreement. Watts didn't. They were reviewing it at the last minute. Also, nothing substantive. Just truly some cleanups to the agreement.
Thank you.
Further questions? Hearing none, we'll accept the motion.
Montplaisir, move to approve.
Peterson, second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll have Briel take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye. Thank you. Next will be the KPH ring levy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. As this is a project related to the Oxbow, Hickson, and Bakke work that's being done, work package 43D5. This is a Hickson Avenue or Main Avenue storm sewer project. This will complete part of the levee portion of the Oxbow Hickson project and allow an outlet from Oxbow to the river. It is in our forecast year 2020 budget, and so we bid this out. We received 3 bids, all clustered very close to each other. KPH was the low bid, lowest responsible contractor, and the recommendation is to approve the low bid and award the contract.
Questions? Hearing none, we'll accept the motion.
Jacobson makes the motion.
Montplaisir, second.
Discussion?
Rick Steen has a question. I was just looking for the information. I had looked at this earlier. Was this the agreement that had 3 bidders on, came in approximately 30% higher than engineers' estimates?
That's correct, Commissioner Steen. The engineer's estimate, I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, was a little over 700,000 for this project. I would note, however, that estimate was prepared prior to the WIFIA loan requirements of utilizing federal contracting provisions such as prevailing wage rates, disadvantaged business requirements, and American Iron and Steel. And so the project was not updated after those requirements were implemented. And so we do think that has something to do with the increase over the engineer's estimate. However, we also know that the effects of the COVID-19 could have an impact on this, and other additional regional work as well. So, you know, it would have been more of a concern for us had the bids been variable between each other, but because they were clustered so close together, we do believe it's an accurate representation of the cost to do the work.
Okay, if I can continue. So bear with me, Joel, then and that's how I understood it. But then we've got all these other estimates out there pre-WIFIA. Requirements. Are we expecting a 30% over, you know, over budget, over estimate bids on the rest of these because of the WIFIA requirements?
Commissioner Steen, I certainly think it's worth and it is a prudent exercise to go back and update our construction estimates, taking into account prevailing wage rates and disadvantaged business requirements and the American Iron and Steel. All of those provisions, especially the American Iron and Steel, are difficult to deal with on an estimating scale, just because it's tied to the markets and what the price of steel is, and that changes as we've seen. Commodity-based items change pretty significantly, especially given the circumstances today. So that is an exercise we will be doing in conjunction with the budget refresh that we're doing at the moment, in order to get a better representation of these local projects. Really, this pertains to you know, underground type of work, lift stations, those sorts of things. So you know, this could affect our budgets for the actual cost of the projects. But I would also you know, throw out the idea that we somewhat anticipated there to be an increase due to the federal requirements with the WIFIA loan. However, the offset of the WIFIA loan with the lower interest and better provisions for that long-term debt far outweighs any initial increase in capital costs on these construction projects. So you're really seeing the savings of the WIFIA on the tail end of the project, in this retirement of the debt earlier, and the lower interest rate that you would receive through WIFIA versus other commercial lending opportunities.
And I understand that piece of it going forward. So we got on the tail end, we may be saving money because of the WIFIA, but does this impact the project cost that we talk about a lot? And I understand that's not the only thing that we need to consider, but does this impact the project cost if we're looking at increased cost because of the WIFIA requirements?
So if this is John Shockley, maybe I can add a little bit of comfort to this discussion, probably the largest contract in the entire project is the P3 contract that covers the channel and all the bridges. Early on in that estimate, even before we had WIFIA, we'd included the federal requirements because we were pursuing TIFIA as an alternative funding mechanism for the bridges. And also in the P3 world, many of those contractors use union labor, which is very close to the prevailing wage requirements. So within the P3 contract, those costs are already captured. The only contracts that you wouldn't have captured the additional federalized costs would be these smaller one-off contracts. The federal costs are already reflected in the land acquisition because you have to follow the federal acquisition rules regarding the land according to the Corps. The Corps' work already reflects the federal requirements because the Corps has similar federal requirements within its contracts. So it really only affects these smaller contracts for work that we hadn't, before we had the WIFIA, we would not have included those in the estimate. So I think that might help to provide some comfort in that the largest portions of the project, the cost estimates had already taken into account some and most all of the federal requirements.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and this is Tony. To add to that, I assume one of the requirements we're referencing is the Davis-Bacon Act, which is under federal contracts, and is an unrelated discussion I had yesterday with a project, a different project, in potential federal funding. Davis-Bacon does apply, but the local experts who have traditionally written grant opportunities here out of Fargo, the prevailing wage rates and Davis-Bacon really aren't a factor for increased labor costs in this market because of our prevailing wage rates. So this might be kind of one-off as far as the uniqueness of it, but just as another anecdote, I guess, about the Davis-Bacon requirements in our market.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, we did compare this to projects being bid with the city of Fargo, and perhaps Mr. Borboom might want to add a little bit to the discussion as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, Commissioner Steen and Grimberg, the city keeps track of all our historical bid prices. And when I compared the bid prices received here to some of our historical prices for especially the large storm sewer pipe, because that's the #1 cost of this project. This project did come in slightly higher than what the city of Fargo's historical bid prices were, but the last time we used this much of this type of pipe was back in 2018. So I think inflation, when accounted for, the bid prices we received here are pretty comparable from what we probably received in 2018. So I think a little bit of the factor here is that the engineer's estimate could just flat out been a little bit off as well for the estimate from what prices should have been put in.
Okay, we have a motion. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I'd ask Brielle to take the roll call vote.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. McCall,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
yes,
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
yes,
Mr. Grimberg.
Aye. Thank you. Approved, Executive Director approved contracts, Joel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is for the Finance Committee's information. There were 4 Executive Director approved contracting actions for last month. All 4 of these are contract reductions, and they're related to the master service agreement with AE2S and pulling them out from the PMC and contracting directly with them. So you'll see the reduction of the AE2S contract on the CH2M Hill Jacobs As the Finance Committee remembers, last month we did approve the master service agreement with AE2S. So this is somewhat of a swap. However, there is some savings with that change. And then we see the reduction in the Jacobs contract under Task Order 5, Amendment 4 for the 2.54. That is savings to the program, as well as the 1 million for Task Order 6, Amendment 2. I'll take any questions if there are any. All right. Then I'll move into, for information purposes as well, the Cass County Joint Water Resource Approved Contracting Actions. These are yet to be approved by Cass County Joint, but we anticipate them to be approved at the next meeting. These are some additional contracting changes that we're making in working with the Cass County Joint Board on. And these would be 2 master service agreements with HDR and SRF. They are currently providing land services to the Cass County Joint Board under HMG. And this would be a direct contracting mechanism with both HDR and SRF to reduce the sub-consultant markup on the current invoices. And with the MCCJPA, we're also doing the same thing with SRF. That should be SRF there. Any questions related to those? That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Moving to item 7, other business, 7A. Program budget status.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is again for informational purposes. As you know, we're in the process of doing a budget refresh. We have encompassed some of the larger items to date, and a few of those just to note for the Finance Committee. I mentioned the contracting changes previously in the meeting here. And we've tallied those up to be about 6 million in savings this year for engineering and program management related savings. We've also identified approximately 8 million in our forecast year 2020 budget that is overestimate of what we anticipate the actual project costs to come in at. We've also identified the 1.8 million in land leases that have come into the diversion and have not been incorporated into our program budget. So a number of savings, some additional revenue, and we're also working on a complete budget refresh that we'll have available for the Finance Committee's consideration at next month's meeting that basically will quantify all this and show, give the Finance Committee a snapshot of where we're at right now related to the total program budget.
Questions for Joel? Good news, good work.
Thank you.
7B.
All right, this item is for the Finance Committee to consider taking action on today. I'll set the stage a little bit with some background. A in-town flood mitigation project had been identified to protect the campus of Oak Grove within the city of Fargo and incorporated into our budget. At the time that was developed, there was some concern over bank stability and soil stability around the campus, and it was determined that the only way to provide protection to Oak Grove was to implement a series of levees around the campus. However, those levees would not be certified protection for the campus. Upon subsequent geotechnical investigation and engineering work that was done as part of the normal project process, it was identified that there were some engineering techniques and tactics that could be implemented in order to provide certified protection for Oak Grove, and increase the robustness of the levees and flood walls that would protect the campus. And so the increase in costs are not encompassed currently in our program budget. And so this would be a budget amendment to the Oak Grove project related to the City of Fargo in-town projects to move forward with a revised project for Oak Grove. And so just for the Finance Committee's consideration, I would like to offset the increased cost for the Oak Grove project, which is approximately $7 million, with the savings in the consultant contracting actions of $6 million, and in the remainder in the land lease revenue that we're receiving as part of our lands program. And that's currently 1.8 million that's unaccounted for in our program budget that could be used to offset the remainder of the Oak Grove mitigation project. From a policy perspective, we would be providing certified protection for this area, whereas the original project as proposed would not. And I think it is the intent of the Diversion Authority to provide certified protection for the metro area throughout. So that this was technically, there's some reasons why this was developed the way it was, and why it's being proposed to be changed at the moment. So if there's any technical questions, Nathan Borboom is available to explain those. Otherwise, I will open it up for questions.
Nathan, do you have any additional comments?
No, I do not. Joel did a good job summarizing.
Okay.
Tony, Rick here.
Rick, go ahead.
You know, I've sat in through a couple of meetings on this, so this is not news to some of the people hearing this from me, but and I understand the certifiable protection, and I know it was described as we've got actual protection with what we plan, but we don't have certifiable protection. And the fix on that is between $7 and $8 million additional cost. And I get that, you know, it's a good policy issue. But just so we understand where we're at with that, is at the same meeting I was at, I asked the question about what would it take to just provide insurance on this property and covering existing buildings, whatever. And I think the cost was like between $45,000 and $60,000 a year. And so just from a financial perspective, I just balance that out to spending $8 million or $7 million, whatever you want to refer to it as, versus spending $46,000 a year. And it doesn't make financial sense to me. It might make great policy sense and it looks good. And I understand all of that. I think the issue here is everything was fine until Oak Grove decided they wanted to build some additional buildings or an additional building on the property. And that's when this became an issue. And in order to do that, they need to have, I don't even know the cost of the new building, but they want the Diversion Authority to spend $8 million so they can spend a few million on a new building. That's the bottom line for me, and I get it from a policy perspective. I don't understand it from a financial perspective at all.
And Rick, that's not totally the story, because they initially were told on our geotechnical, and Nathan confirmed this, is that they would have had to take their classroom building out if we were going to do a project. So for them, if they didn't have non-certifiable, that worked only because they didn't have to take their classroom building out. And they were told that. So the reason they said they accept non-certifiable is because if they went the full route, they would have to replace their classroom building plus the other building they're going to replace. So it was only when Nathan and the team really looked at it that we felt we could give them certified protection. That might have been a different conversation 3 years ago had they known that. And Nathan, you can fill in on that part.
Yeah, no, the mayor is correct. When we initially looked at it back in the spring of 2018, when we were developing the budget for it, the geotech information we had at the time would have resulted us having to remove one of their classroom buildings in order to provide the certifiable protection. So the mayor is correct. That's where we had the conversations with the School of Oak Grove and decided to head down the path that we did, that would have not removed that building and just kind of left it as is and not provided that certifiable level of protection.
And this is Tony. Let me just add.
And then the other,
Go ahead, Mayor.
oh, and then the other issue is yeah, 100%, 100-year certifiable. But Nathan, if we have a 500-foot event, what do we have to do in that area if we don't have what we would have set up?
If we would not proceed with the project that's being contemplated today and we'd have that 500-year flood, then we'd be looking at emergency levee going down Short Street, which would be to the west of Oak Grove, and leave Oak Grove on the wrong side of the levee.
This is Tony. Let me just add. There's a jet flying over my house. If you can hear that. Just pause a second here. You know, in my opinion, you know, this is kind of a unique situation. I certainly understand, you know, Rick's point, but from a finance perspective, I think we would all agree as we move forward. If we're going to bring new things that are not in the budget, you have to find the funds to pay for it. And that's one of the things I often share when I get a call, whether it's from anybody at Jacobs or Martin or Joel, which isn't very often. You know, is it in the budget? And if it's not, that's a big ask. And recognizing we have a contingency that is going to be illustrated out in a updated budget next month. The team found the money, and Joe reported on that. So, you know, on one hand, we're saving money, we're reducing contracts, and we're going to get a snapshot of where we're at next month. But to fund this, we found the money. Joel and his team found the money to pay for it. We didn't come to the finance committee or the full diversion expecting approval of a project addition without knowing how we're going to pay for it. And I think that is center stage, one of the underlying principles that I think we need to be sensitive and aware of to move forward. And because as we continue to go, we cannot keep adding things because we have a budget and we have to hold everybody accountable to those budgets. But in this case, we found the money. So I'm comfortable with it. I just appreciate the good work to find the funds and to actually do some additional value engineering, which I think Nathan didn't share, but was a higher amount as well. So it's through a process, we've come to a good place.
Hey, Tony, one last question or comment from Rick.
Please.
And I don't disagree with anything you just said, and I'll end up voting for this project. But I do have a question for our city engineering crew, because this was a surprise to me when this first came up. And so the question is, so we are not aware, and we are pretty confident of the fact that we do not have any other areas within the city of Fargo that is not certifiable. Is that correct?
Nathan?
Yes, that would be correct.
All right.
I'm not aware of anything.
Just so we have it on record, that's all I want to know.
Okay. Is further questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Peterson, second.
Further discussion, questions? Everybody understand what we're voting on?
Can I just one other comment, Tony?
Please.
You know, we're voting on an $8 million deal. It would have been nice to have some documentation in the information that we were provided before we were, you know, presented with this. Just a comment going forward.
Okay, so noted.
Mr. Chair, I'll address that. Commissioner Steen, we will have a formal amendment prepared for adoption. So we wanted to bring it to the Finance Committee to ensure everyone was comfortable in making the request to the Diversion Board. And we will prepare that formal amendment and produce that additional information. So.
Thank you, Joel. Hearing no other, we'll have Breel take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Miss Johnson,
Yes.
Miss McCall,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
yes,
Mr. Hendrickson,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
yes,
Dr. Mahoney,
Yes.
Mr. Grinberg.
Aye. Item 7C, is that Mr. Shockley?
Yes, that would be me, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So just briefly, we have completed our WIFIA application, and we would like to have board approval to submit the WIFIA application. We are running a few days behind because of the delays associated with COVID-19. The rating agency is running a few days behind, as are the auditors. It's not a significant delay. It's anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days. We had intended to submit the application on April 1st, but we're going to be submitting the application on May 1st. WIFIA actually has a draft copy of the application that they were providing comments to us, and we've been, over the last 6 weeks, been uploading significant supporting materials for WIFIA. You'll see in the resolution, we do note that the minimum savings on the WIFIA loan is $572 million. The amount is probably greater than that, but with the interest rates bouncing around so much right now, we wanted to be conservative in our estimate. And also that doesn't include the structural advantages for the WIFIA loan. I can certainly answer any questions that you might have. I've been having meetings with the Cass County Joint Water Resource District, municipal advisor, Ernst & Young. I also reached out to the city of Fargo to talk about the fiscal agent duties that are contained in the master indenture of trust that sits behind the WIFIA loan that you'll be hearing about in later meetings. But this is really the first step of many to reach closing on the WIFIA loan. So I'll answer any questions, but I wanted to keep it brief.
Mr. Chair.
Chad.
Rick.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rick.
That's okay. Yeah, I'd just like to move to recommend authorization of submission of the WIFIA credit application to the US EPA WIFIA program.
Is there a second?
Montplaisir, second.
Discussion. Hearing none, we'll have Breel take the roll.
Mr. Montplaisir,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin, Mr. Costin, Miss Johnson,
Yes.
Miss McCall,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson,
yes,
Mr. Hen-
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
yes,
Dr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg.
Aye. Thank you. Last item, 7D.
Mr. Chair, I can take that one. This is a resolution requesting the city of Fargo to undertake engineering services for project in-kind elements. And if I'll just scroll down here a little bit and identify the projects. And so a number of projects have been identified: the Horace Sanitary Lift Station and Force Main conceptual design and layout, as well as the Cass County rural water and some water services to Horace, hydraulic modeling. And so this resolution would allow the City of Fargo Engineering Department to expend the engineering resources necessary to meet our obligations with these projects and be reimbursed through the diversion authority.
And to confirm that amount is not to exceed $60,000.
That's correct.
Questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Steen.
Rick?
I recommend or move to recommend authorization of the board to approve said resolution.
Is there a second?
On pleasure, second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none, we'll have Breel take the roll call vote.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Costin? Mr. Costin?
You're on mute, Kent.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Ruddinger?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Grimberg?
Aye. Motion passed.
Mr.
Next
Chair.
meeting-
Mr. Chair.
Rick?
Steen again. Sorry about that. This was not on the agenda, but under other business, could Kent just give a really quick update on how the audit is going?
I'm happy to do that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My staff have been working on that as our first priority to compile all the financial statements for 17, 18, and 19. They're well through that work, and I believe the audit process is scheduled within the next couple of weeks. We anticipate field work to take a couple of weeks, and we've talked with John about getting an extension. I believe it's until July 1st with regard to final completion. So we believe we're on target, and it's highest priority for my finance staff ahead of all other city activities.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next meeting is May 27th. Look forward to the updated budget presentation and where we're at with our project. And I'd also like to thank everyone. Today's meeting was pretty smooth with teams and coordination and engagement. So compared to last month, we made tremendous progress with doing this online. So thank you, everyone. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Peterson, so moved.
Moved and
Second.
seconded. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.